Hey, welcome everybody to Spin Legal this evening. This is October 7th, episode 86, with Angela and myself and our guest of honor, Justin O'Donnell. Welcome, Justin.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you,
Justin. Yes.
Okay, so we are talking this evening about treaties with Indigenous people. So let me just introduce very quickly what we normally go through, which is if you need to contact Invictus Legal, you can do so on 905-688-5598, or you can email Angela at angela@weareinvictus.legal, and myself at peter@weareinvictus.legal, and you can visit our website at weareinvictus.legal. There you go. Okay. And this is Trick or Treaty with Indigenous People, this title. I like that title, Justin.
Yeah, it's actually from
you got to spell INDIGE.
It's actually the title is from the University of Alberta Coursera course, the chapter of the module on there. So
yeah.
No,
okay,
so it's a very good course. I recommend you take it. You can do it for free, and I've learned a lot from it in terms of Indigenous law.
Things going on with Indigenous training. Yeah.
Okay, so give us an intro, Justin. There's obviously a number of treaties that were taking place in order to get us to where we are with Indigenous law today. Maybe you can give us a quick intro in relation to that. And essentially where we were last week is we were just talking primarily about Truth and Reconciliation Day.
Yes. Now, first of all, I want to point out, as I did in the previous episode, there is a difference between Indigenous law and Aboriginal law. Indigenous law is law that is created by the Indigenous community, whereas Aboriginal law is created by the federal, provincial, and in some instances by the municipal governments. Examples of Aboriginal law would be, the biggest one would be the Indian Act.
Yeah.
And the treaties are regarded as a source of law within the Indigenous community. And this dates back as far as 1619, when Dutch settlers came over to North America. What had happened was they communicated their treaties and whatnot through a two-row wampum belt. And it's a Haudenosaunee.
Haudenosaunee.
Haudenosaunee, thank you. It's sorry, no disrespect to any members of that band. Pardon my pronunciation. Now, what had happened was there was a treaty that was created between the Hond and help me again, Peter.
Haudenosaunee
and the Dutch, and it's what it was is it's symbolized coexistence and mutual respect between the two communities, and it's represented by a row of two purple beads, and they're traveling side by side in the river of life. Now, it's important to realize that there is a distinction between how the Indigenous communities recognize treaties as opposed to a colonial perspective. Now, with regards to the Indigenous communities, treaties are regarded as sacred. Their roots are based in kinship. Oral agreements play a major factor in it, and reciprocity rather than written cessions of lands are key. Colonial perspective of treaties. They are regarded as legal instruments of land surrender and sovereignty transfer.
Yeah. And obviously part of that is, of course, you've got a king in a foreign land who's never going to leave said foreign land, who's now ruling over a land they've never seen, never wished to see, and a people who they would never wish to see either if we wind the clock back to that particular era, right? Not trying to portray that image in the current era, of course.
No. It's no, that is what it was back in the day, back in certainly 1613. Now, when you go through the history, especially as it pertains to the Canadian Indigenous community, what had happened was between 1725 and 1779, there were peace and friendship treaties. And they established alliances, and they were responsible for regulating trade and securing peaceful relationships with Eastern Canada without land surrender, such as the Micmac concept or the Angu Gamwai adding to our relations.
Yeah.
Well, regulation of trade would be something that any persons coming into North America, as in new people coming into North America, they would desire that, because obviously what they don't want to be, they want to be self-sufficient in the new land, be able to survive, and be able to ensure that their families have got a place to live and survive, and that they can eat.
Right, and that peaceful coexistence and establishing regular trade was crucial for both the colonists and the Indigenous, not only in what eventually became Canada, but also the British colonies that eventually became the United States of America.
But the Hudson's Bay Company, what role did that play?
Well, it played a role in that they didn't sell land per se, but they helped negotiate and parcel out land.
Okay, but again, if you're looking at some of these treaties that you've been talking about, you've got talking about the first treaty here was what, 1600 and something, and then you're talking about and then you're talking about peace and friendship treaties that going on from 1725 to 1779, and I don't believe the Hudson Bay Corporation was created until 1647, was it?
That's correct.
Hudson's Bay was before that.
Sorry?
Hudson's Bay was before 1725.
Nope, it was correct.
I said 1647, I believe. Yeah.
No, it's okay. It's I mean, it does get a bit confusing at times. It's
and obviously the Hudson Bay Corporation, is many people think of the Hudson Bay Corporation as being somewhat like the British East India Company, but it wasn't.
That's correct. Yeah, it existed primarily for the purpose of trade, and they helped in terms of like they didn't give land title to the colonists, but they existed to help facilitate relations between colonists that wanted to go on the land.
What we used to call the fur trade.
Yes, the fur trade was crucial, and we will discuss that in a separate episode as well.
Mm-hmm.
That was a very key towards the history, and I suppose existentially to Indigenous law as well, but that's a separate episode.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, what happened was things escalated. And not necessarily in a negative way, with the Royal Proclamation of 1763 and with the Upper Canada Treaties of 1764 and 1836. Now, these were key in that Indigenous titles and they recognized, I should say, Indigenous titles, and they required treaty agreements between colonists and the indigenous bands before settlement. So they were still very much respecting indigenous right to land. They weren't trying to privatize land, so to speak. They had to get permission.
But there must have been areas whereby Western settlements were created, or European style settlements is probably the best word to use there.
Patience, Peter, we're getting there. Yeah, we are. Now, what happened was the Robinson Treaties of 1850. This was another significant event. Now, what happened was it secured lands around Lake Huron in the Superior, and it introduced reserve provisions. And it was significant because it preserved hunting and fishing rights for the indigenous communities, and it later became a template for the numbered treaties. And we're going to be discussing that later on, so just don't skip ahead. That's it. I mean, it's just history goes chronologically, cause and effect.
Okay, no,
I'm going to bite Alberta in the butt if they try to separate.
Okay, so one of these things that you're giving us names, and I notice here everything you're saying is treaties, plural, not singular, and there's clearly a reason for that.
Yes, there is. It's misspelled treaties. Treaties. I've never heard of that legal term.
Sorry. That's the trouble when I'm trying to put the
well, the treaties, they were like, there was no one confederacy. We didn't have like, at least in Canada, like a First Nations assembly at the time that could speak for everyone.
Yeah.
So you would have to establish different treaties with the different bands within.
Yeah, the point being it's not a treaty like you might say the Treaty of Versailles was one treaty.
No, it's not.
In that war, you're talking about treaties that were headed by, I'm presuming somebody by the name of Robinson, who went around all of the tribes in order to build said treaties.
To build agreements about land use.
Yeah.
Yes, it was. And again, and I refer to what I stated earlier, that there were two different perspectives on treaties between the indigenous communities and the colonial perspective. So it would create a bit of a loggerhead at times, and that loggerhead would become more pronounced as history progressed, and it would have an impact on indigenous law.
Okay.
And Aboriginal, for that matter. So.
Mm-hmm.
So what was essentially what's the Robinson treaties about?
Well, I had already explained the Robinson's treaties. I think you're referring to the Douglas treaties.
Okay, move on. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. What they did, and this is what Angela was asking. It focused on land agreements on Vancouver Island, and this is where settlers began to view them as purchases. But again, there is a difference in that the indigenous saw this as a compact for peaceful coexistence. So, I mean, there are starting to become some significant differences at this point.
Trying to build a conflict.
Yes, that's right. Now, the numbered treaties, there were a series of them that lasted from 1871 to 1921. Now, this comprised of 11 treaties, and this, again, went into the West. Now, it dealt with land in the prairies in the North, and it dealt with negotiating access for settlers to land and resource development in return for reserves, annuities, education, and hunting and fishing rights.
Okay, so educate me if I'm misunderstanding. In the United States of America, a lot of the move west from the Midwest out to the entire west coast of America was done in much the way of kind of you could stake your claim on there, and almost indigenous ownership of land was ignored.
Yes, it was. There were pioneers going out there in the West, especially after the Civil War. And again, I don't know if you've seen 1883. That was a prequel to Yellowstone, and it was first of all, it was an excellent miniseries in that it depicted, I think, for the most part, accurately pioneers who were moving to the West. They were trying to get to Oregon, and they had to deal with the indigenous community and whatnot, and there were conflicts over what they saw as land belonging to everyone, versus private ownership and privatization of the lands by settlers.
All these people coming in, traveling in those covered wagons.
Yes, no, it was, and it did cause significant conflict. I mean, the indigenous were somewhat resentful, especially with what they saw as the self-entitlement of the settlers. And
well, I can imagine actually in the day it might well have been exhilarating to be on one of those covered wagon trails.
it was, but it was fraught with
Yeah,
a number of difficulties. Another one you could watch, a Ken Burns documentary, The West.
Mm-hmm.
That very accurately.
The gold rush.
Yeah, and the gold rush, and it's not like okay, let's go to Oregon. I'm going to book the passage on Amtrak. This was a long, arduous journey. It was fraught with dangers. They had to deal with the elements. They had to deal with wild animals. They had to ration food. They had to go in wagons. And what happens if a wagon breaks down?
oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this was no joke. I mean, and
Yeah,
this was
it's
major
not like you can
commitment
stop
they
at
had to make.
McDonald's on the way or use your.
And there were casualties. To say the least. It's it's just. Oh, sorry, Angela. What did you say?
Yeah, it wasn't like you can just go to McDonald's or you can use your cell phone to call for help.
Exactly. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, it was brutal, and and it was difficult for both sides because the indigenous, and I think with some justification, saw them as intruders who were trying to interfere with their way of life.
Mm-hmm.
So there are two sides to it as well. And, but in any event, I digress. I don't want this to turn into a history lesson per se. But,
Yeah, this is why I did a lot of studies on that one, and very sad.
Yeah. Okay, so you were talking about numbered treaties.
Yes, and there were also more divergent interpretations of the treaties developed over time. The indigenous communities saw it as a nation-to-nation sharing agreements, and Canada saw these treaties as outright land surrenders.
Okay.
So that was a huge difference. That was a huge loggerhead.
Okay. And one of the next, okay, where are we going next?
Where are we going next? Treaty 6. This was one of the more notable ones. Now, this was, there were promises made for a medicine chest, for famine relief, agricultural support, and continued land use rights.
Yeah, this would be in Alberta, right? It's today.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this was, these were promises that were made at the time by the federal government. They entered into the treaties.
Okay. How many of these treaties actually continue on? Sorry.
No. Well, there were 11 treaties, again, between 1871 and 1921.
Okay. Of which Treaty 6 was that one of the most prevalent?
One of the most significant ones,
Yeah.
because governments, the federal government started making pledges to the indigenous community. Where they were committing resources and guaranteeing rights and whatnot, and especially land rights.
Is this part of the reason why whenever Canada does anything, and Angela mentioned Alberta, this is one of the reasons why when we deal with anything in Alberta, there's usually Indigenous members in the, looking at new negotiations?
Well, what it is, Peter, is part of our Constitution. We have Indigenous rights built into our Constitution.
Yeah, I get that. And
she is absolutely correct. It was built into the Constitution. Now, as far as modern day treaties, now this addressed unresolved land claims and Indigenous governance. Now, Indigenous governance we're going to discuss probably in the next episode, because that had a huge impact, obviously, on Indigenous law, and there are also 4 models that I've discovered in my research.
Okay.
Again, like, you just can't lump all the Indigenous into just one category. In my research during this, I discovered that several of the bands, they are very territorial with regards to their reserves. It would be like if I were, say, a Mohawk Indigenous member, and I decide to go to, say, Nova Scotia and live on a Micmac reservation. I'm going to be odd guy standing out, because there are rivalries between some of the bands or the tribes.
Well, they wouldn't be rolling out the red carpet.
Not necessarily. It's no, you're absolutely right. And we're going to say, it's much like other, outside the Indigenous communities, we've got racial problems between whites, between African Canadians, Asian Canadians, immigrants from outside of Canada. It's really no different.
It's really no different about our debates about immigration.
Exactly. No, it's very much true. And of course, there is issues. French Métis, for example, they're not exactly considered legitimate Indigenous by all bands.
Yeah, I get that, and because
even though they've had a significant impact, especially in Saskatchewan, with Louis Riel, who was posthumously recognized as the first premier of Saskatchewan recently.
And he got hung for his efforts.
Yes, he did. I mean, he was regarded as a traitor by the Canadian government. And there you go. It's it was a very controversial period in history, and it's still a source of debate.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Continue on. Sorry, I've gotten lost in my paperwork.
Okay. Now, one of the most modern day treaties is in 1993. Now, this was a landmark in that what had happened was there was wildlife management and sharing of revenue for resources and self-government. And the area eventually became the territory of Nunavut. Okay. Now, yeah, so it's it still goes on. It was made as a it was decided as a treaty, and
this
it still exists to modern day. So I mean, the treaties still play a major role in both Indigenous law and they are having an effect with constitutional law within the rest of Canada.
Is this treaty bring forward and create the land of Nunavut or
the territory?
Sorry?
The territory of Nunavut, I think, was starting to be recognized in 97 or 98.
The groundwork was
started after
in 93, and you're correct. It did come to fruition finally in 1997. I was actually advised of this. Actually, ironically, I was in Virginia at a family reunion, and I was talking about, well, there were 10 provinces and 2 territories. He said, no, not as of 48 hours ago. You've got 3 territories now.
I was in Ottawa. I think it was either in Calgary or it was in Ottawa at the time. Yeah. And we were talking about the new territory of Nunavut.
Yeah, and there you go. It's I think that the road is still open. I mean, we're going to have other issues down the road with regards to implementation of treaties, and again, how well, I guess at this point now it would be more the levels of government versus the Indigenous communities, and especially with organizations like the Assembly of First Nations, are going to be that is going to be very interesting, and is something I would suggest people monitor. It's fascinating, and I think it's going to add, frankly, to the distinctiveness of Canada in terms of not only culture but to the legal system. Because as I alluded to in the last episode, like in doing research, I spoke with a friend of mine. She's a business consultant who had done work with the Indigenous community, and she suggested, and I'm starting to think it's not going to happen, I think, in our lifetimes, but the time it may come where they will recognize Indigenous law to the point where they may have to do as they have done with Quebec Code Civil. They had to appoint 3 justices from Quebec who were trained specifically in that, because it would just be unfair to have.
Okay, that's a fair question there.
And I think maybe they're going to have to do the same. Maybe appoint 3 Indigenous judges who are familiar specifically with Indigenous law. There have to be parameters set in legislation and possibly the Constitution as well. But and it's also interesting because a lot of people say Canada is a common law country. It's not. It's technically is one of 2 territories in North America that have what I would call a hybrid legal system of common law and Code Civil. Canada, specifically Quebec, the other, the United States, specifically the state of Louisiana, they use Code Civil.
But again, with both, when it comes to the Superior Court of both the U.S. and Canada, they do recognize, and they do recognize largely within Quebec and also Louisiana, where common law applies, it would be applicable. And
it's done largely like in Quebec, common law is applied for criminal law.
Yeah, and it's from the Louisiana Purchase and that history.
Yeah, that's right.
For France.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and the Civil Code.
And again, the point being is there are times when the Civil Code does not apply, but common law does. And if you think about it, the fact that they have a Supreme Court, and the way that the Supreme Court works is the Supreme Court gives precedence even to civil code, which by European normal standards does not have precedent applied to it.
Well, that's right. No, because each you're right. They don't use precedents. Each case that is brought before court is regarded as a unique and distinct legal event. And also, what they do is, since they don't use precedent, all the laws are codified. And I was speaking. One time with a friend of mine. He was training to become a German judge because, like in Germany, what you do is once you get out of law school, you train to either become a prosecutor, a defense counsel, or a judge, and that is it. You are doing that for the rest of your career. And they said that in this case, he was trained to be a judge, and he said basically that the libraries are just full of codified laws that are in text after text after text, and if you want to, you have to use those as the basis to argue in their courts, and these are voluminous. Whereas with Indigenous law, like it's there is some basis, like, and again I refer to the great piece of what's known as in some circles as the Great Peace of the Longhouses. That was set up by the Iroquois Confederacy, and it's also based on oral tradition, and they even include folklore in there as well. So it's unique, and it would be interesting to see if they were to include, if they were to get formal recognition in the Constitution or by federal statute, under what circumstances it can apply. I think it would make our legal system all the more unique.
Okay, so we got a couple of things that we really need to also look at is ownership versus stewardship, because
Yes.
I think that is a key differentiator between, let's say, Western law, like common law or code civil, and how the Indigenous communities manage their situation, because they consider themselves stewards of the land, not owners of the land.
Well, that's right. The Indigenous, the Indigenous nations view land as an opportunity for shared stewardship and coexistence, peaceful coexistence.
Yeah.
Now, the Canadian settlers and later the government, they viewed this as strictly land transfer, with no regards to stewardship, or the land belongs to everyone. They believed in private property.
Yeah, my home is my home.
Yeah, and you will notice that, like, especially when I was in I think grade 7, I was visiting Quebec on a class trip, and you could actually see the parcels of land that were granted there. I mean, that's an example of land that was granted by the government, which is a piece of history.
Yeah.
And how that would radically conflict with the Indigenous beliefs, especially when it came to interpretations of treaty.
Yeah, so the several thousand square foot or several hundred square foot that I own as my plot of land, and that Angela owns as her plot of land, and theoretically you would own, your father owns as his plot of land, for example, are all seen as contravening the stewardship concept.
It is. No, it's a direct conflict between the interpretations. And also, as I alluded to like a few minutes ago, there are oral versus written interpretations.
Yeah.
Oral is used by the Indigenous communities, and they emphasize reciprocal relationships, such as, for example, as long as the sun shines, rivers flow, and grass grows. And also, there is a matter of the continuity of treaty rights. For example, annual treaty annuities and other modern agreements reaffirm, the nation-to-nation relationship between the Indigenous communities and, I guess, the Canadian government. And there has been a legacy of conflict. Obviously, I mean, there are different expectations. The Northwest Resistance of 1885, for example, because that happened because of basically broken promises and unfulfilled commitments that were made by the federal government.
Mm.
So that was a major source of friction, to put it mildly.
I was going to say, why aren't we internally at war because of all these broken treaties?
Why aren't we at war? Well, my opinion would be because they used a divide and conquer. They were placed on reserves.
Yeah.
And it's kind of ironic because I remember back when Brian Mulroney was prime minister, he was severely criticizing South Africa for the apartheid regime. Now, the P.W. Botha was the president at the time, and he pointed out, I guess, to then Prime Minister Mulroney, well, first of all, you're one to talk about how we're dealing with minorities, racial minorities. Well, they're not even minorities; they were the majority, which was part of the controversy. You're criticizing us for putting them into ghettos and their equivalent of reserves. You have lost, whereas you, sir, Mr. Mulroney, are from a country that has forcibly put people onto reserves. You canceled their government. You replaced them with bans. You basically had total disregard for their use. And he also pointed out correctly, frankly, Mr. Mulroney, little known fact that the apartheid model was based off the Indigenous Reserve model.
Okay.
Well, the whole Indian Act was based on apartheid of the Indigenous
People. Right. Yeah, it would be like, and this was an analogy I read in my research for this. If all of a sudden, we're living in a neighborhood or whatever, and say, okay, let's say for the Indigenous just came in and said, okay, we're taking over here. You're being confined to certain blocks. Your housing is going to be limited. You are going to have limited at best government, and the rights you have are going to be prescribed by us.
Yeah.
And I see how that would anger the Indigenous community, especially when this was implemented early on, and especially because it led eventually to residential schools as well. And we're going to talk about that a little more in the future.
It's a whole in-depth history of colonialism.
It is. No, it is, and it's think in some ways it's a shameful period of Canadian history. I mean, the way
And
that
it's still going on.
have been treated, especially in the residential schools, and that needs to be addressed. I've known some people, some Indigenous who had the misfortune of having been forced to attend those schools, and it was scarring and traumatic. And the residential schools, the creation was an example of Aboriginal, not Indigenous law.
Yeah, and same as the 60s scoop and.
Oh yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, and it was an attempt by largely the Catholic Church. The Anglican Church was guilty of it as well. And this isn't just unique to Canada. This went on in the United States as well. And again, I'll use another example. 1923, which is another prequel to Yellowstone. They had a disturbing subplot. There was a she had to have been, I think, 12 or 13-year-old Indigenous girl. She was out in a residential school out in the west of the United States. And this woman, in addition to all the other students, first of all, they were, this girl was beaten for speaking her native tongue, which the nuns regarded as heresy. And they were told, you're going to renounce these heretic ways of your culture. You are going to be good Catholic wives and mothers. They included severe beatings. This character had suffered cruel beatings by a narcissistic priest. Excuse me 1 second. Sorry. Lesson to be learned, ladies and gentlemen, mute your phone before you do an interview. But no, she had suffered severe abuse, beatings by a narcissistic priest. There was one nun who beat her repeatedly in front of everyone. At one point, she got thrown into the equivalent of a hot box or solitary confinement when she dared to stand up to the nun in physical self-defense. It finally, and she had also been raped by another nun as well. I mean, this is the kind of treatment that they got, and I thought it was kind of timely they released this around the time where residential schools were coming into fire. And what had happened was this girl was finally driven to the point she murdered 2 of the nuns. She fled the residential school, and the priest in question tried to lead a posse to go get her and stuff. And it was just I'm not going to spoil the ending in case there, but I mean, I thought that was a very realistic depiction, and I'm glad that they included that, especially in light of what's happening now. And you have to think, I mean, let's just set aside Indigenous law. Like, how can one human being treat another like that?
I have a question. I have a question for you, Justin. Now, you talked about the modern day treaties, and these were 1973 to today. And it occurs to me that, the first question when you first mentioned them, I'm looking it up and reading it, and I'm thinking, well, by 1973, surely we had resolved all of the outstanding issues that we had with Indigenous people in Canada.
Well, not necessarily. There are still issues with regards to hunting and fishing rights, and there are also problems over natural resources and who has rights to them.
Well, yeah,
like the Ring of Fire in Ontario.
Reserves don't even have proper housing or good drinking water.
And, it's and ironically, there was a scandal. I don't know how many, 5 or 10 years ago. Some of the Indigenous chiefs were responsible. They were basically, freeloading off of the money that was meant, for the people they were leading and for the reserves. I mean, like these chiefs were basically the equivalent of of being a mayor and stuff, and
an unelected one as well. Come to that.
Well, no, they do elect in some areas. They do elect chiefs, but. Even so, I mean, that's and it's situations like that have given the Indigenous bad publicity.
Okay.
And,
and of course, the question. There's a lot of questions about. There's many. I guess new settlers that have come to Canada in the last 500 years that kind of will say, well, let's just get on with it, and who cares about these treaties?
Yeah, it's true, and that was one of the reasons. They were like, especially when they started expanding in the West, they wanted to start creating private property and land claims because they were concerned that Americans were going to migrate to Canada to solidify their hold. So it's yeah, and you know, it is it's becoming more complex.
Quite. And the point being is that I've often wondered why we seem to have a lot of well, I characterize the creation of the reserves as almost like entrapping those people, as you pointed out, some form of apartheid type regime, whereby, and let me use another simile, the fencing off of the Palestinians in Gaza, for example.
Yeah, that's that's a fair analogy.
And the
depending on which side you're on, I should say, but
well, and let's not go over to there. But the point being is, we can understand the simile of that situation and how because what concerns me is, for example, I live in Niagara Falls. There's not many Indigenous people live in many of the Western towns, if you get what I mean, if we understand what that terminology means. And the Indigenous people are often hived off into reservations, and we don't get any kind of coming together. Whereas when you look at the immigrant population in Canada, there's been a coming together of like blacks and whites, of Indians and blacks, of Indians and Chinese,
yes,
etc. That whole mosaic that exists within Western cities, but that has ignored and passed by, if you like, the whole Indigenous population.
Well,
it has. I mean, I think they have.
The majority of them live in cities and not.
They have a number have left. The reserves, and it's interesting because there are a number of Indigenous who actually support repeal of the Indian Act altogether. They're saying, why should we get special privileges? Why should we, have tax exemptions? Why should we have our tuition covered automatically? Why should we, have funding for houses on our reserves? I mean, this is, it's because I mean, it's because you've got supporters and detractors on both sides. And that's just not just law, or it's just life. It's you can't paint everyone in the same brush and just assume because you belong to one race or one creed or and they're going to automatically go with the majority.
And again, going back to much of Canada as it exists today, we do have a good mishmash of people. Okay, so we do have racists. We do have people who favour one religion and one band over, one group of people over another.
You'll find them in any nation or any culture.
Exactly. And it's a part and parcel of any challenge that we get within any land. But you see, for example, the mishmash of people that we get in Toronto, for example, or even, to the same extent, but smaller in somewhere like St. Catharines, is the same mishmash of people that you have in cities like London, Berlin, Paris. And even Delhi and
well, they're becoming what I would call international cities. Toronto is a prime example. It's kind of funny. My cousin Mark was visiting from Ireland 25 years ago. Time flies, but he was. We went to Toronto, and he was just amazed at all the different cultures that were there. I think he was expecting something a little more homogenous. Of culture, and he's like, man, this is just like Star Trek. All these cultures getting together and getting along and everything. It's
actually coming out of London when I went to Toronto, I'm like, yeah, okay, what's new?
Well, no, London is an international city. I had the opportunity to visit last year, and it's amazing. Even Dublin, for that matter, is becoming since they had joined the EU, a lot has changed.
Well, some people are calling Toronto the third world country.
That's a very nasty.
Okay, well, I'm not going to go there. I mean, that's a completely separate discussion of Indigenous law. So,
and that's I think a slur upon the great city of Toronto.
Yeah, or we have the Torontonians coming down the Niagara, and it says, "Darn those Torontonians."
well, we're talking about Indigenous law, not Torontonian bylaws.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we've kind of come to the end of this particular thing. Any further items to stay on this, Justin?
Just that the treaties in general, they're not static. They're living agreements, and they're examples of contrasting interpretations, and it's going to be interesting to see how those interpretations evolve over time. I think a lot will have to do with the development and the improvement of relations between white Canadians or other Canadians of other backgrounds versus Indigenous. I'm hopeful that over time it will, and I think it will lead to greater understanding. One can hope, and I think that what's happened, although what had happened with the residential schools and what we were talking about on National Reconciliation Day was tragic. I think in a way it was a bit of a turning point, because I think a lot of there has to have been a lot of soul searching outside the Indigenous community, and I think that there is a genuine move now to try to redefine, not only redefine, but to re-examine not only the relationships they have with trees, but try to respect the role that they have played. And again, I mentioned this in the previous episode. My attitude towards the Constitution. I mean, personally, I would be reluctant to open it up to distinct society again and stuff because of the problems that Meech Lake and Charlottetown had occurred.
It's like it can't be done. A constitutional amendment just can't be done in Canada.
Well, I can't, but if it were to happen, what I would advocate for, and this is just my opinion, I would say, okay, we are made up of 3 distinct nations, 10 unique and distinct provinces, and the 3 nations in this order: Indigenous, French, and I'm not just talking Quebecois French. I am talking French, as in French Acadians, French Métis in Saskatchewan. There are Franco-Ontarians. Welland, for example, have
Franco-Ontarian, yeah.
Yeah, they have one of the highest Francophone communities in Ontario, and all of them have made equal positive contributions to this country. And the third would be the English nation. And by English, I'm not referring to just Anglo-Saxon. I would refer to anyone from any ethnic group that identifies primarily as an Anglophone. And then as far as the provinces are concerned, I would say, okay, you know what? All 10 provinces are unique and distinct in their own rights, and I would use the Bill van der Zalm model of let them explain why they think they're unique and distinct, put it into the Constitution. I think that would be the only fair way to do it. And hopefully we can address issues like Indigenous law, and maybe even talk about like the uniqueness of common law, Code Civil, and Indigenous. Okay, and what are we doing next week? What are we doing? We are going to be doing the political governance in the Indigenous community, because that, of course, has a huge impact on the creation of Indigenous law, and also it affects the relations which have an impact on Aboriginal law and impacts on treaties and whatnot as well with the levels of government.
Okay.
And I'm looking very much forward to doing that.
All right. Well, thank you for today's episode. I think it's been interesting listening to what you've had to say about this, and
the history of this. It's fascinating.
It is. No, I've learned a great deal in my journey towards learning about Indigenous.
And a lot of good research has gone into this, and we're keen to hear what goes on next week. And so just to play us out, so if you need to speak with Invictus Legal, you can do so at 905-688-5598. You can email Angela with angela@weareinvictus.legal or Peter with peter@weareinvictus.legal, or go to our website and phone us. Anyway, we can help. And Angela.
Yeah. So what you heard today on this show, or in any other of our shows in our history, in our series, it's not legal advice. If you'd like to seek legal advice about anything, so please contact a paralegal or a lawyer. We'd love you to come to us and talk to us, but do talk to a paralegal or a lawyer so that you're getting correct advice.
And I would just like to add, this was done strictly for educational purposes. I would like to maybe delve more into Indigenous law as my career unfolds. But that being said,
and that's being
I am no expert at this point. Far from it. I'm a novice at best, and do not call me for legal advice. Not at this point in my career. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. And have a great day, everybody. And
thank you for having me.
We'll see you in a week.